It was dark and stormy out. The lightning flashed just as they opened the front doors and into the warm restaurant. Even though it may have been warmer, the atmosphere seemed equally as moody as outside. Before we start, can we get this video to 1,000 likes? Please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Then they saw him. They need to go right up to him and give him a piece of their mind. He coached the Columbus Lions and a football team in Georgia. This wasn't too impressive since he was also a lieutenant colonel. His name was Robert Risden. His primary focus was being a husband and father of two. He didn't always get a chance to go home. He often worked late and had to work long hours. Risden had to travel across the country since he coached two sports teams. He and his co-coach Jason Gibson had to also scout for the teams on top of that. Risden was very fatigued from scouting and coaching the teams all weekend. His team was practicing for the Senior Bowl. He thought he could now relax, but not yet. They were getting close to home, but then a storm broke out. There was only one place that was close by, a Taco Bell. They were also starving, so they decided to stop there anyway. The restaurant would be dry and warm and have a bite to eat. It would be good. As they got to the front door, Risden heard the thunder crackle. The storm had gotten far worse, and he was glad to get indoors just in time. The windows shook as the thunder rattled them. Risden didn't know at the time that the weather would be the least of his worries. Surprisingly, the restaurant was packed full of people. It seemed that more than just him had the idea of taking shelter from the storm. He ordered what he wanted and found an empty table in the middle of the restaurant. All of the booths were full. He was so hungry and he couldn't wait to chow down into his meal. But then he noticed something. The two characters were dressed all in black and were sopping wet from the rain. He noticed slippery water gathering up at their feet. The poor guys had walked to the restaurant to get away from the storm. He wondered how long they had stayed out in the rain to get to the place. He knew they noticed him and were acting very suspicious. His training in the army had prepared him for that. He kept an eye on them to make sure there was no funny business. Risden thought that the suspicious characters could cause trouble and things could escalate quickly. He was still wearing his military clothing. Maybe that's why they were eyeing him. Then the two young approached the cash register and made a gesture to the cashier. It would be a gesture that would make him spring into action. The cashier shook her head at the two boys. Whatever she said to them made them make a rash action. They quickly turned and began to approach other tables in the same manner. What were they showing them? Everyone they approached had the same reaction. The boys became desperate and began to move faster. That's when they spotted Risden in his uniform. Risden expected them to run and hide as the uniform often provoked that reaction in younger boys, but what they did surprised him. They straightened up their posture and made a beeline straight for him. Risden was getting ready to assess the situation that had everyone staring at the boys, but then he heard a shout. One of the restaurant employees began to shoo the boys away, but they were determined. They bypassed the worker and stood in front of Risden. They were soaking. Risden looked into eyes that appeared to have captured the entire moon. What they said next shocked him. "Do you want to buy some candy?" they asked innocently. They discreetly showed him the bag full of baked goods. A big smile flashed across Risden's face before it suddenly disappeared again. He wondered why these boys were selling candy at a restaurant, and then remembered he had no cash. He asked his co-coach, Gibson, if he had any, and he said he didn't. He told the boys he had no cash and watched their shoulders slump and their heads bow in disappointment. "What are you selling these for, boys?" Risden asked. "Don't you like them?" The boys replied that they were trying to raise money for their church, then turned to leave before Risden called them back. They looked like they hadn't eaten a meal in weeks and had been out in the rain selling their stuff for a while, Risden recalled. "I can't even count the number of times I was cold, wet, and hungry in the army. To sit in warmth and eat some tacos is a big victory for them. Can you boys finish off 10 tacos?" Robert asked. The two boys stopped and turned around with a huge smile on their face. They nodded proudly. Robert got off of his chair and brought them to the till. He told the boys that they could have anything on the menu for free. Their faces lit up, but before they agreed, they surprised Risden further. They rang their grandfather and asked Risden to speak with him as proof that they weren't using the church's money to pay for their food. Risden's heart broke at their quiet obedience, even though they had been walking in the rain and skipping dinner to help the church. Risden helped them order 5 tacos each, while Gibson captured the whole heartwarming encounter on video. They both ate their first taco in under a minute, Gibson said. "I'd never seen anyone devour food that quickly before." The 2 men were also blown away by how respectful the 2 boys were. "Everything was yes sir, no sir," Gibson said. "Whoever is raising them is doing a great job." But this is what one of the boys had to say to Risden. The youngest brother, BG, who was 9 years old, recognized Risden's uniform and told him how much he wanted to be a soldier just like him when he was older. "He was saluting me with his left hand while holding a taco in his right, which is the proper hand to use," Risden said. "So I made him put down the taco and taught him the proper way to salute, which will come in handy if he actually grows up to be a soldier." After the video of his encounter went viral, Risden explained what was running through his mind. "My kids were running through my mind the whole time," he said. "The thought of my kids in their situation broke my heart, so it made me react and want to help the boys out, and the least I could do was buy them some tacos." Let's move on to the next story. An action doesn't need to be big to help someone. Sometimes the most unexpected thing ever happens during the most unforeseen circumstances. Before we start, can we get this video to 1,000 likes? Please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. It's great when people show a bit of backbone, but it's even better when their courage manifests itself in smart, calculated actions. Amazingly, a 14-year-old boy was able to carry this given characteristic. It was a Wednesday night when James was at home in Shepherd, Michigan. He was watching over his sibling Asselin, 11 years old, and Angus, 2 years old, because their father had to drive a few miles away to pick up his fiancée from work. Minutes after his father left, James heard a loud knocking at the door. He tried to ignore it at first, but the woman continued to frantically scream in panic, asking them to let her in. James even recalled her saying, "I would die if you don't open the door." Cautiously, the boy opened the door to find a young woman with bruises covering her face. She was holding her arms close to her body. One of them was broken. She rushed into the kitchen. She shouted that someone had kidnapped her and was trying to kill her. She even told the children that they needed to hide from there. The teen remembered that his father had told him that in case of emergency, he should get everyone into one of the bathrooms, the only room in the house with no windows. James started his plan to make sure that everything will be fine. He acted quickly and locked the door, turned off the lights, and took the injured woman and got his siblings to climb into the bathtub. He even told his sister to call 911 while he retrieved the hunting knife he had just gotten for Christmas. Meanwhile, his father has just arrived at his fiance's family business. Suddenly, he heard his cell phone ring. To his surprise, it was his frantic son on the other end. His son said something to the effect of there's a man outside the house and that he needs to go home as soon as possible. As soon as he heard those words from his son, they automatically rushed home, and while on their way, he asked his fiancée to keep James on the phone while waiting for some rescue. It wasn't long before they heard the alleged attacker, Eric Ramsey, beating his fist and shouting. He was forcing his way into the house. The seconds passed and things got even more terrifying when everything fell silent. When Eric couldn't force his way into the house, he retrieved a container full of gasoline and a match. The children and the young woman waited anxiously in the bathroom and hoped that help would arrive in time until finally James's father arrived. He hoped he would be able to surprise the intruder. He cut his lights off within a tenth of a mile, hoping to catch the person outside. He didn't find the intruder, but instead found the bottom of the house. Aglow, Hurston put out the fire with the side of his body and his feet. He tried to break a window to get inside, not knowing if the intruder was in the house. The children finally opened the door when they spotted the cops in person met them in the living room. That's when the children started talking about the woman with them. Authorities quickly found her. She was injured, but amazingly calm. Paramedics cared for the woman, and the cops questioned her before she was taken to the hospital. Authorities also interviewed the children and informed them that they didn't have to worry about the man coming back as the man was already taken down by the authorities. Later on, James together with his sister Eslyn were hailed as heroes. Isabella County Police Chief Leo Miodowski believes James saved the woman's life. James' dad was proud of his son's quick thinking and courageous efforts. James will be honored with a life-saving award at a county commission meeting. Let's move on to the next story.